Hello, I'm Ashley Henderson. I'm the Director of Conservation Programs for the Alabama Soil and Water Conservation Committee. And today I would like to discuss with you conservation planning and some of the tools that you might find helpful in developing the Natural Resource Conservation Plan for the 2021 Alabama Envirothon Complex Issue, which is a plan for the Seven River Springs Conservation Area. The complex issue has been described more completely in a separate video and also in the attached documentation. What I want to concentrate on today is the planning process and the different steps that you will need to undertake to address this issue. You will be using the 9 steps of conservation planning, and there is a link in the attached document that will take you to the NRCS Natural Resource Conservation Service website to get more information. So you're going to use these 9 steps and create a 5-year plan for the consortium, and you should address competing needs of the community and stresses that are placed on natural resources. Focus your planning on local issues and local solutions while realizing that there may be state, regional, and federal interest at play. You should consider how water resources impact many aspects of the community and determine the compromises that prioritize the issues that the community faces. Furthermore, determine the methods to reach the community with input from stakeholders on the front end of the planning process, as well as outreach to the stakeholders after the plan is complete. These resources might be something simple like a flyer that explains something, a Facebook post, a video interview with a television station. You can be very creative in this process, so let your creativity inform this part of the process for sure. So now we're going to pause and I'm going to share my screen with you so that we can go over the different steps of the planning process. Okay, so this is the website that you have the link to in your attached documentation, and it outlines the 9 steps of the conservation planning process. So the first step is you need to review the scenario and brainstorm conflicts that are created by the complexities of competing needs. Research any issues that are unfamiliar to you and create a list of potentially interested stakeholders. We understand that some of these stakeholders may be fictional, and you also might include stakeholders that have a national presence, and that's okay. If you would like to look at a area-wide plan, you can click here, the Little River Marsh Restoration Project. We'll pull this up just real quick. Okay, you can see here that the different things that are included for this restoration plan and environmental assessment. There are several different links here that you're welcome to explore so that you can get a better idea of this project. It is also summarized on this page. So this might be a good place to do a little exploration and kind of understand what a plan might look like. This is very detailed, and we understand that you're limited in time, so we don't expect this much detail, but we want you to understand what a plan would look like. Okay. Second, determine the objectives. So in this step, you need to determine what the local interests might be, where there are conflicts between two or more of those interests, and where there might be conflicts between the interests of the stakeholders and protecting natural resources. So create a list of all of the objectives that you can think of, and then narrow that list down to 3 or 4 that you want to focus for on the plan. The ones that you decide that you're not going to focus on, just include a short sentence on why you decided that that should not be one of your top 3 or 4 objectives. The third step is to inventory the resources. So determine what information would be beneficial to collect to aid the planning process and what information you already have in the description of the complex problem. You can use this information to further define problems or opportunities, and you can create a list of different type of information and where this information might be found. The information could include things like water quality data, demographics, water quantity data, soil characteristics, and other things. If you would like to explore the NRCS National Resources Inventory, here is a sample that you can look at. This is land use in New Hampshire. And you can click on this 2012 report to get a better idea of what a natural resource inventory might look like. And you can also use the soil survey program link. And from here, you'll be able to see a soil survey program in New Hampshire. But if you scroll down, you'll be able to look at the National Soil Survey Program for the United States. And there's several other interesting links that you might want to consider in this. However, don't limit your information or your resources to just these two things. Be creative and do some research about some of those other items that you might want to include. Number 4 is to analyze resource data. So for each type of data that is listed in step 3, identify which is the most helpful in assisting with addressing the challenging issues that are identified in the complex problem. Make sure to include what baseline will be used to judge how effective the project is after it has been put into place. Step 5, you need to formulate alternatives. And in this step, you need to include at least 3 alternatives. One of the alternatives should be a no action plan, like what will happen if we just do nothing. The second alternative, or a second alternative, should include voluntary conservation. So in this alternative, you might lay out some of the best management practices that stakeholders should adopt. You can also lay out incentives for them adopting them, and you can list local, regional, or state items in this voluntary conservation plan. And then the third type is a project type plan, which would include things like physical projects that could be implemented, as well as policy changes that might need legislative action. Number 6, you will evaluate the alternatives. You should evaluate the impact of each of these alternatives on your resource concerns, on the local economies, on what is the funding potential, what's the likelihood of community adoption, what are the potential regulatory requirements, and what are other environmental impacts that might happen by implementing a particular alternative. Number 7, make decisions. So at this point, you can choose to take one of the alternatives that you described in step 7, or you can even combine different parts of the different alternatives in step 7 and incorporate them into an area-wide plan. You also often have a public review period. So if you want to describe comments that you might get from the public during this period and how you would address those, that would be another good part of step 7. Step 8 is to implement the plan. So you identify how your plan will be implemented, and you include potential funding entities and the major components of your plan, and then the lead group or lead agency, lead stakeholder that would be involved in implementing that portion of the plan. And then finally, step 9 is to evaluate the plan. So a conservation plan is an ongoing process. It's often called a living document. So you will need to identify how you will determine if your plan, if the implementation of your plan has been effective, Like, what are your benchmarks? How are you going to measure? How are you going to monitor? And then you also need to identify a mechanism to adjust the plan, do adaptive management for changing conditions and outcomes. So, if you implement the plan and things change, either they get better or they get worse, how are you going to change the plan in the future? And what is the mechanism going to be for changing the plan? And then finally, I wanted to mention again that you should make sure you include any outreach materials or plans that you develop to include stakeholders in the decision-making process up front, and or any plans that you have to communicate results of the plan to the community at large at the end of the project. So I hope this has been helpful for you and that you can use these resources to help you make your conservation plan. We know that it's a complex issue, and we know that you are completely capable of doing this planning process, and we look forward to seeing the results of your efforts. Thank you for participating in the 2021 Alabama Envirothon.